Welcome to the continuation of Dave's AF Trains video featuring American Flyer Trains by A.C. Gilbert, rebuilt and maintained to engineering practices, factory specifications and standards, and underpinned by lessons learned from literature, personal experience, and as we'll see in this video, collaboration and applied knowledge to update and advance the skill of the craft. We're on the bench with the, at this point, disassembly in the rebuild of the tender for 336, the 484 Northern Union Pacific locomotive. I think it's 1953 to 1957 by A.C. Gilbert. At this point, I think disassembly is complete, and you might be wondering why the speaker, resistor, and capacitor are separate from the tender. I like to remove the speaker, capacitor, or at least get them out of the way, and resistor away from the reverse unit during the rebuild. In this case, of course, I've gone ahead and separated it. I don't plan to replace them. If this was an owner's train, I would replace it with a newer speaker at least, possibly reusing the capacitor and the resistor. However, those can be bought in a kit. But since it's my train, I'm not going to replace it because I don't particularly like what they bring as far as play value and sound quality. So I'm not even going to replace it. Of course, it's going to have to be replaced. It's coming loose. It's separating from its metal frame in the back. And then, of course, on the front, on the paper, it's got a substantial tear that goes approximately halfway around. And then there's another tear right here that you can see if you just barely move the paper. As a matter of fact, this one extends over here. And then there's another one that's right in here. So I don't think there's much reason to put this speaker back on. So I'm going to leave it off. It is attached to this bracket right here, which is has a rivet to the chassis. So it's a good place to attach a new speaker or a different one, a replacement, but not now. So what I did was I severed the wires here where the resistor and the capacitor meet and marked both with red so I'll know in the future where it was reattached, should be reattached, and where the brown wire extended to the reverse unit. I severed it so I could still find it, and I'm going to put a small red wire nut on it, and I'm going to secure the wire nut simply by putting a drop of DuPont model glue right there on the end, which serves both as a insulator and to just secure the cap. Should work just fine. In case you didn't know that, I picked that tip up from somebody that DuPont's model glue can be used as a insulator. I'm going to flip this back over, talk a little bit more about what I plan to do. I'm also going to change the lighting just a little bit so that maybe the parts will show up a little bit better. All right, I'll remove the axles and the wheels. They're going to need a thorough washing and polishing. And again, notice the amount of some sort of buildup on this axle, that black section right there. I'm not convinced that's all carbon burn because I have seen in the past, not a lot of, but I have seen it, where the owners would put lubricant on these springs, I guess trying to improve the friction or resistance. And I'm not convinced that's not what this is in part of the way because it's so gooey. And comes off on your hand, although it could be just excessive carbon. The plug panel is in good shape, as is the wire harness. So I'm going to move that out of the way as I plan to resurface that after polishing these pins. So get that out of the way. So remove these in anticipation of performing the washing of the chassis first. I'll cover the reverse unit, which has not been rebuilt, with plastic. I will not submerge this. I just don't want a lot of water splashed on the reverse unit, which has worked well for me in the past. Then I'll remove the axles. They'll be thoroughly washed and polished. This will be thoroughly washed and polished as well. It'll look new when I get through with it, if there is a definition for new. And one of the things I notice is I'm going to focus in on this right here, on the tip of this spring. Look at the size of the worn, the wear or the hole on the end of that spring. I've never seen one that large. You know, it's not too far away from possibly being capable of not holding this structure and pressure from the spring and falling off. So I've got to come up with a way of replacing that. Now, Mr. Barker suggests solder at times to improve fingers that have holes in them. And of course, as per my normal practice, I collaborated with a colleague who I consider to be an expert in this and asked him what he thought about the solder. He said he much prefers it be brought back to factory standards, which would be a copper surface here, not solder, which of course always has a potential of falling out. So the challenge is how to get something from my boneyard, like this spring contact here, maybe taking part of it and attaching it to this spring so that where the axle touches, it is coming in full contact with copper, so that we don't possibly lose some of the load coming from the track to the axle, to the wheel, to the axle, to the spring, and to the motors, and to the power source that goes into the train and the reverse unit. So that's going to be one challenge. Thorough washing is going to help. The other thing I did is go ahead and remove the broken knuckle coupler here. Its shank was fractured and the knuckle coupler fell off. So I opened up this portion, the arm portion of the truck, to anticipate installing a reproduction. I think Portland's calls these a single hole, the one hole knuckle coupler replacement. I've used these before, it works great. You just reinsert them and close the tabs back up and you're good to go. I also removed the springs, the slide contacts from their boxes, their shoe boxes, as well as the springs, anticipating to clean these out thoroughly. I have found some of these to be very blackened. Clean up the slide contacts. Now, in separating them, even before separating them, I noticed these boxes were a little bit loose. They will rattle just a little bit. So as soon as I get the rebuild part of this complete, the springs back in, the shoes back in, I'm going to put a clamp on the box to clamp it, apply pressure from here to the outside of the truck. And then I'm going to run a bead of JB Weld down both sides. And I found that works extremely well to re-strengthen these to possibly eliminate any breaks in power source that might be the source of possible crackling or anything like that. So from this point on, it's just going to be washing, polishing, cleaning, and that includes the coupler bar. You can tell that it is distorted. I'm going to focus in on it. It has some distortion. You'll notice that from the small part of the bar to the large part, it's not even tracking each other. So it's going to need to be reshaped both lengthwise and vertically and horizontally. And I'll do that while I have it in this disassembly state. Then I'll reassemble it. And by the way, of course, I want to get the bottom completely finished. All polishing, washing, polishing, replacement, everything before I even start on the reverse unit. Because when I get to the reverse unit, I want that to be the only thing left to do. And of course, this follows my normal practice of back to front, inside to outside, bottom up rebuild, so that as I move up to the locomotive's motor, I know that its power source is solid. But I did notice one thing on this I've never seen before. Notice that there are 3 screws holding the reverse unit in place. I've never encountered that. I've only encountered this one screw holding it near the front where the drum is located, but never utilizing the screws back here. And yet this one does, at least not in my immediate recall, though I remember seeing all 3 of these used at once. Maybe I've seen them used on top, but never on the bottom. And finally, of course, once the bottom is complete, I'll be jumping up to the reverse unit with a complete disassembly, drum removal, finger removal, everything to inspect the fingers, make sure they're aligned left to right, and there's proper tension to the apply pressure to the drum, cleaning and polishing the drum, lubricating all points of friction and resistance, such as where the axle comes through, and make sure it has complete freedom of movement. So from this point on, I'll be bringing you up to date on what the rebuild of this looks like.